All right, so you just. So with that, I'm going to let Hailey get started. How's that?
Sounds good. Share my screen. All right.
Oh, okay.
All right, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining today to hear me demo the tool that I've been developing, NeuroStack. This has been like a passion project of mine for the past several months. I've been working on developing it in collaboration with Nitrick at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. Essentially, what NeuroStack is it allows you to build infrastructure in AWS that makes it a lot easier to do neuroimaging analysis using AWS cloud computing. So before we get started, does anybody, I want to make this as like accessible as possible. So who all has experience with using like an HPC or like working with data like programmatically, where using a command line or something like that? If I could have a show of hands of who.
Kind of these guys, I think.
Okay.
That's probably a lot more. Not much more. Oh, Akshaya, you've worked on the HPC, right? Or you do command line stuff. Yes.
Yeah.
And maybe Jan and whatever you taught Juliana. But I think Kim and Mia, this is going to be new for them.
Okay. All right. So we'll talk a little bit. It's a little easier to understand when you see what that process looks like. So we'll get into that a little bit. And also just to see, did everyone get my email yesterday and this morning? And is there anybody who's planning on following along with the demo? Okay. So yeah. All right, that's okay. Well, because you can see it on the screen too, so that'll work. All right. Okay, so my presentation today is going to have 3 basic parts. The first, we're going to talk a little bit about AWS, talk about what AWS is and cloud computing, and also I'm going to introduce you to a few services that are relevant to NeuroStack. Then we're going to start working directly with NeuroStack. First, we're going to do work with NeuroStack using a program called AFNI. AFNI is a software package that's commonly used in neuroimaging for functional analysis of MRI images. But we aren't going to do anything very fancy with it. We're just going to do something very simple and just convert from one file type to another. Just because that's a very short process and it's something that you can see work in NeuroStack from beginning to end. Then we're going to do work with NeuroStack using FreeSurfer. FreeSurfer is like the standard software package for doing structural neuroimaging analysis. And we're actually going to do like realistic work with it. We're actually going to process the subject in FreeSurfer using NeuroStack. But to process a subject in FreeSurfer takes several hours. So we're not all going to sit here during that time. I'm just going to show you how to set it up, and then later on you'll be able to look at the output. Also, feel free to ask me, if you have questions about anything at any point, feel free to ask me. So let's get into talking about AWS. What is AWS? AWS is a cloud computing platform. It's one of many. There's tons of cloud computing platforms, although it's probably the dominant one. Definitely the top 3 would be AWS, Google Cloud Platform, and Microsoft Azure. And what cloud computing platforms allow you to do is it allows you to borrow computational resources and pay for only what you need. So if you imagine that you're at, a large company that's going to need some computational resources, then you need to buy all of the computers and the servers to be able to do that work. and you're going to need to hire people to be able to like maintain that infrastructure. If you're trying to scale your company, then you need to have people who know like how many servers you're going to need to order to be able to keep up with your computational capacity and everything. And maybe you only need those services at certain times of the year. Maybe you're going to peak at certain times, but most of the time you only need a much smaller amount. Say like during the holidays, you're going to use 3 times the amount of your computational resources. But you're still going to have all of those computational resources like sitting, drawing energy, needing people to maintain them. At a lab, you can imagine the same kind of thing, where you're going to need, say that there's some sort of analysis that you want to do that's going to require heavy computation, but you're only going to do it once. So before you would need to still, buy all of the computers or maybe borrow it from somebody. With cloud computing, you're able to buy just to use like very powerful computers if you want to for small amounts of time, even like milliseconds. It can be divided up into. You can use it for storage and all kinds of things. And so many industries are moving into cloud computing. And research is one area that is also, I think, moving increasingly into using cloud computing. We are seeing a lot of large research data sets that are being hosted on cloud platforms, particularly on AWS. I started working with AWS because we wanted to work with data from the ABCD study. The ABCD study is a large longitudinal study of adolescents and children. And for one time point, you can have as many as like 11,000 imaging files. So very large amounts of data. And so that is hosted on AWS. You can pull down the data onto like your own infrastructure. Say you wanted to pull down the ABCD data and work with it on the HPC. But there's a couple of problems with that. For one, when you do that, you are then kind of like hosting your own local version of the ABCD data set, which, imaging files are large. And with that many imaging files, you still have to pay for all of that storage space that you're taking up. And so you're going to be paying for, to store all of that data yourself. And then AWS also charges egress fees from taking data off of AWS. So it is not necessarily cheaper to bring it down and work with it on your local resources. And it's not as scalable as working with it on directly on AWS. There's also the NIH is really encouraging researchers to move into cloud computing. They've started the NIH Strides program. So if you are an NIH researcher or like a researcher that has an NIH grant, then you are automatically enrolled in the Strides program, which will give you access to training on how to use cloud platforms, and it will also give you discounts on AWS services. In the NIH, they published a strategic plan for data science, and encouraging and implementing more cloud usage was considered a primary objective. So there are tons of different services that you can use on cloud platforms and AWS. I think AWS has over 200 different services. So, there's services related to the Internet of Things and machine learning and basically anything that has to do with computers. You can probably find a service for it on AWS, which can be really intimidating when you first get started and you feel like you have to learn about all these services. But really, there's only a few that you need to work with for most use cases. And these are the ones that I think are particularly useful for research and are relevant to NeuroStack. The first one I want to talk about is S3 storage. These are called S3 storage buckets. And it is AWS's basic storage. For a user, it looks very similar to a file system that you have on your computer, where you have a folder, with some files in it. Maybe you have subfiles within those files, you have subfiles. On the back end, storage buckets are different than a file system. And there are some like nuanced ways that you can interact with it that are different than a file system. But for basic usage, it's pretty similar to what you would use for a file system for your computer. Then there are EC2s. EC2 is AWS's basic compute. They come in all different sizes. So you can use time on like, tiny mini computers up to like gigantic powerhouses of computers. And they also come in different flavors too. So if you're needing to run a job that requires a lot of computation, then there are specific EC2s for that versus if you need a lot of memory for your job, or if you're going to be doing like graphical processing, then there are different EC2s that are optimized for those use cases. Then there is batch. Batch is for batch computing. And it basically provisions EC2s in ways that are useful if you're going to be running, like say the same process for lots of jobs. So for research, it's very common that you have a lot of different subjects, you want to process them the exact same way. And so batch is very helpful to do that. Then there's Lambda. Lambda is event-driven computing. Lambda is really fun because it allows you to like have triggers for different services that will do things in AWS with other services. So let's say you can write a Lambda function where you input data into an S3 bucket, and by inputting that data, it will start processing the data in some way that you specify. Or if you have like a certain number of EC2 jobs, then something else will happen. If you have like something triggers in batch, something else will happen. Then there's CloudFormation. CloudFormation is infrastructure automation. So let's say I have a project and I've set up all this infrastructure for it. I have all these S3 buckets, I have my batch set up in a certain way, I have Lambda triggers, and I really like this setup. And I want to do the same setup for another project. I could go in and manually set up all of these services again. But if I need to do this lots of times, then that wouldn't be ideal. So instead, what I can do is create a CloudFormation template where I basically write out to AWS instructions for how to set up all of these services. So that I can use this template and I can apply it to a bunch of different projects as many times as I want. Or say, I've figured out, an infrastructure that works really well for a project, and say Jan wants to use it. So I'm going to send my CloudFormation template to Jan, and he is able to take the template and install all of the AWS services within a few minutes on in his AWS account. So NeuroStack is a CloudFormation based template. And so NeuroStack, essentially what it does is it sets up this infrastructure in a way that is optimized for neuroimaging research. And then there's also IAM. So IAM is access management. And so within a single AWS account, you can have lots of different users. And those different users can have different permissions to allow them to do certain things or restrict them from doing other things. And also, IAM allows you, and this part is a little bit confusing, even still. Sometimes, whenever there's an error, like half the time it's because of some IAM setting. Also, AWS services are allowed to interact with other AWS services in certain ways. By default, they don't really interact with each other, unless you specify in your IAM roles that they can talk to each other. So an example of this is if you're using an EC2 instance, then you need to create an IAM role that allows you to talk with S3 if you want to be able to read in and write out data to your S3 bucket. Does anyone have any questions about these? before I move on?
If we want to use NeuroStack, we have to learn how to do programming.
So it is, it's set up with the assumption that you would be able to use the neuroimaging, the programming that's necessary for neuroimaging. So most of the time, neuroimaging researchers are going to be interacting with their data programmatically, like on an HPC or even their personal computers. There are, like with most software packages, there are like GUI options to use with neuroimaging, but it's not the recommended way to use it. And it has, because usually the GUI has reduced functionality, and also you have to process each subject individually, like, by pointing and clicking what you want done. And it also doesn't keep a very good record then of like what happened with each subject. And so like maybe you like forgot to check a box on like one subject or something, so it wasn't processed the same way. So most neuroimaging researchers, I imagine, that would be trying to move into the cloud would be familiar with how to interact with their data programmatically. So you would need to do that with NeuroStack.
So yes.
Which is why no.
Okay, so we're just gonna do a little, we're just gonna look at one of these services, EC2.
Actually, can I just jump in for a second, Jeff? Because I think there's another interesting answer to your question. Learn programming is a big phrase, and I wouldn't necessarily want people to get turned away, because learn programming can include everything from fundamental programming, so understanding a language from the inside out and being able to generate new code, but it can also constitute script hacking. So in script hacking, you don't need to know the language inside and out, but you do have to be working with templates, and you have to understand the knowledge enough to be functional. So I'll give you an example. Nikki Sinha, who was originally on the Lexinome project, because of COVID and all kinds of stuff, she moved to working with Jeff Malins, and she took all his scripts, learned enough of the language that she was using for processing the brain images to script hack his work, and in doing so actually learned a lot of the languages needed. So you could use script hacking as a way in and actually get stuff done, do meaningful work, but you don't know programming. At the end, you'll know programming a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. So there's roots in, even if you think you're completely a non-programmer. Truth is, every single bit of programming I have learned has started with script hacking as my entry point. So that's just a sideline. I don't know, Hailey, does that sound reasonable?
It does, yeah, I would absolutely second that. And that also describes like my process of learning as well. I wouldn't say that it was like I just sat down and then like learned programming and then I could, it's just like, I started with, just kind of running some scripts to process neuroimaging files. And then, sometimes it would fail. And then I needed to figure out why it was failing, or I needed to, similarly, again, working with Jeff Malins, like we wanted to adapt it in, a slightly different way. And so I learned a little bit more. And then just over years, you kind of build your skill set. And I wouldn't say that I'm like that now, even like there's still a lot about like, I bet like no one even knows, everything that has to do with the, like computer science and everything, but you just kind of grow that skill set over time. So yeah, I would absolutely second that.
Is that your computer that froze, or is it?
Oh, no, so then I am just bringing up.
It does.
It does look what? Oh, yeah, I see.
You'll just need to share your screen.
Okay, yeah, let me share my screen. Okay. So I'm just gonna get into this is the
Oh,
Gruen
you're live.
AWS account. Yeah, I'm gonna show you how it works too. Actually, before we start on that, I'm gonna talk a little bit about. All right, so when you have an AWS account, you'll log in and you're gonna go to like the AWS's like main console, which allows you to go into different like service consoles. So yours, if you were to log in, probably wouldn't have this because this just has like recently visited services. You could look at all services and you can see, you know, all the different services that are available. You can search for services here. And so when I click on one of these services, it's going to take me to that services console. So now we're in the EC2 console, and so we can do different things with EC2. So we're going to launch an instance and take a look at what that instance looks like. Before we launch an instance, one thing that you'll want to know is before setting up your first instance, you'll want to set up a key pair. For those of you who've worked with an HPC, it works pretty similarly where you create a key pair, and it's basically, you know, a very long alphanumeric string that is like kind of a username and a password. And AWS is going to keep that username, and then you download the password. You get to download it once, and then you need to put it somewhere where you're going to remember it and be able to access it, because that's your key. If you lose that key, it's not a huge deal. You can create another key pair from the console. You can see like I have a few key pairs and I could create another one if I wanted to. But that is what's part of the security behind being able to access your EC2s so that other people can't access your EC2s as well. All right, so I'm going to go into instances and I'm going to launch an instance.
So what's an instance?
An instance is just like one EC2. Like EC2 is the service, and an instance is just like the singular of that. The first step to setting up an instance is we need to choose an AMI, which is like the computing environment that you're going to be working with. I'm going to choose this AMI called Nitric, the Nitric computing environment. These are the people that I've been working with on developing this, and you'll see why. Nitric has a lot of neuroimaging analysis applications already pre-installed. So I am going to select this. And actually you can go on the Nitric CE webpage, and it will give you the instructions to do all of this. Here you can see a bunch of the different instance types. So you can see T2 Nano, which is probably like incredibly small, up to like Z1D.Metal. Sounds pretty insane. And you can see that there's different pricing for it. So you can see what the cost is per hour to use it. Another thing that you can see is that there's the charge for the EC2. This is what AWS is charging. And then sometimes the software is going to charge something as well. Nitric is free, so it doesn't charge anything. But a lot of like software that you would typically pay for, like I think, you know, like SAS or SPSS, things like that, you can use that software for just a short amount of time, but they'll charge you for it for using the software plus the EC2. Okay, so then we're gonna continue.
Did you have to choose one of those?
Not yet, but now I do. So now I need to choose. I'm gonna choose a C5.large, which despite it being called large, isn't super large for doing like neuroimaging processes. And the C family is one that I like because it's one of the flavors of EC2 that is optimized for doing a lot of computations, which is mostly the jobs that I would be running. There's lots of different settings that I can specify with this. I can add additional storage if I want to, although that should be plenty for just kind of looking around. I can do tagging, which is if I have a bunch of different projects, I can tag them so that like in my billing and everything, I can see just like what I used per project. The security group, Nitric has its own security, but I'm going to select one that I actually already have. And then I'm going to launch this, and this is where it says about the key pair. So I'm going to choose a key pair that I have on my computer. I have to acknowledge that, if I don't have the corresponding private key file to this, then I can't get into this instance. So then I'm going to launch that instance. And then I can view my instances. So now you can see the instance that we just started up. It's initializing. It'll take a few minutes for it to get up and running. And I don't want to wait that long, so I already have one set up for us. So we're going to go into that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select it. I'm going to hit connect, and that gives me some instructions. I'm going to use this. I'm going to SSH into it. SSH just basically allows me to go from using my computer to like this other computer. So I hit this terminal on my computer, which is my own personal computer. So I can go into like my desktop, my documents and stuff, but I don't actually want to be interacting with my computer. I want to be interacting with this EC2 instance that I just set up. So I'm going to SSH into it. So I copied that. There's actually a few modifications that I need to do to it that you would see on the Nitric website if you were following along with the instructions there. Like the username, instead of root, I change it to Ubuntu. And the way this is set up, it assumes that I'm in a directory that can find key pair free, my private key, which it can't. So I'm going to tell it the file path of where key pair free is. And then I'm going to enter. So now I'm going to list the directories that are here. And you can see now I'm on a different computer. I'm on this EC2 instance. I'm on like Nitric's compute environment. So if I put in this command for FreeSurfer, which just kind of tells me about FreeSurfer. FreeSurfer is already installed, so you can see it was able to find it. AFNI is also installed on here, as well as a bunch of other software. We can go to AFNI's in a specific place here, but I'm going to change directories into AFNI's directory. Show which directories these are. I'm going to change directories into AFNI's binaries, and you can see a bunch of AFNI commands here too. So I can set this up in a way with my EC2s so that I could have data in my S3 storage, and I could copy it in and do some process with it, and copy the finished data out. And that would be a basic way of using AWS. And this, by the way, is very similar to what this process looks like if I'm working with an HPC or I'm working programmatically with neuroimaging data. So let me show you what it looks like when I get onto an HPC. So I'm again gonna SSH. But I don't want to be on my local computer, I want to be on the computers at Yale's HPC.
So for those, the uninitiated, the HPC is the high performance cluster here at Yale, which is a bunch of parallelized Linux.
So I am gonna enter a password for this.
And so what Hailey was saying before is that, there are two approaches to this. One approach is we could have downloaded 11,000, images from AWS where ABCD has stored them, and then work on this on the Yale high performance cluster. But the problem is that we get charged downloading. It takes forever to download 11,000 image files. And then we get charged for storage here. So we may not get charged for computing time, our equivalent of an EC2, but we get charged for everything else. So in the long run, it just makes more sense just do it all up in the cloud, if that makes any sense. So where you have your black type, that's actually you're connected to the Yale high performance cluster. On the right side, in the green, you're connected to the EC2 and AWS, specifically within F.
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, you can see this is what, in the black, what the HPC looks like. This is just my directory within the HPC. So it's got some of like random data and things like that here. But you can see, so this is how most neuroimaging researchers would work, is they would either have like access to an HPC, or they use like a terminal on their computer to be able to work with their data programmatically, where they have their data in this space, and then they're going to like type in commands that tells the software how to run, as opposed to using a graphical user interface or a GUI in which people are like pointing and clicking. Because as I mentioned, that's not like the optimal way to be processing neuroimaging. All right, so I'm going to hold on, these. Does anybody have any questions about this before I move on?
Maybe just say one word about what AFNI is.
AFNI, oh yeah, so AFNI is just it's a common neuroimaging software that's used for functional MRI analysis. So functional MRI analysis is when you're looking at how the brain is like functioning over time. So when you look at like activation patterns, that is a functional analysis, as opposed to structural analysis, which is saying, the hippocampus is, so much bigger in these participants versus this other group of participants. Okay, so I'm going to close these, and then I'm going to show you something really important if you are wanting to work with EC2 instances on your own. You can see the one that we set up is now. We were waiting for it to initialize, and now it's gotten to this like 2 out of 2 checks passed, which means that you're ready to connect. So the really important thing is that with AWS, you pay for the time that you use, and that counts for the time that you use even if you're not really doing anything with it. So right now these are still running, even though we aren't using them. So we want to terminate these. So I'm going to right click, and then I terminate these instances. And that will stop them running, and it will stop us from being charged. And like, yeah. Yeah.
I think for new users, don't they give you like some X number of credits?
They
I forgot
do.
how much.
Yeah, so they give you, there's like free tier usage where you can use like some of the smaller computers, you can use like small amounts of data or something to kind of get the hang of it. But I'd say like for new users, one of the biggest mistakes is forgetting to terminate their EC2s, and they get charges that way.
So for like Mia and Kim and Akshaya, you can actually sign up to AWS. You don't have to be part of University of Toronto or Florida State or Yale. You can just sign up, and they give you some X number of credits, which I did about 2 years ago. And then I started creating EC2s, but I didn't know how to shut them off. So 3 months later, I got a bill for $600. Now, the good news is that I called them and they were very nice and they understood and they laughed and they said, no problem, we'll just wipe out the box. But don't do that. Because you get a little, surprise Visa bill and it's like, oh, how did that happen? It's supposed to be like 5 cents, it's $500. Thank you.
Okay, so all right, so you can see that the way we were working with that, before I get into that, the way we were working with this before was it's usable for like small amounts of data because I could, copy data in, do some work with it, copy data out and everything. But when I was working on this project with the ABCD data, I'm like, am I going to do that for like thousands of imaging files? And even if I scripted it, then, when the script ends, it goes like one at a time. Like I could have a bunch of EC2s, for example, but like when the script ends, I might not know exactly when it ended. And so I'd have to like log in and see what my script is doing. And it just requires a lot of interactive work on my part, which is not optimal for when you're working with large data sets. And most of the people I think that would be interested in doing neuroimaging on AWS are working with these large data sets that are hosted on AWS. And so I felt that there was probably an easier way to do this. I built a pipeline for myself to work with the ABCD data. And I realized that if I modified that pipeline a little bit, I could create something that would be generally usable for other neuroimaging researchers that would help them to transition onto AWS without having to learn a bunch of different services. Because it took me months to learn all these services and how to work with AWS in a way that I could work with lots of data. So, so now let's install NeuroStack. So singing, you can log into your AWS account, and then once you're logged in, then you want to click the Launch Stack button that I sent in the email. So I'm actually going to log into. I don't want to do this in the Gruen account because there's just a lot that I've already built there, and it's kind of difficult to see what's NeuroStack and what's all the old stuff. So I'm going to log into my personal AWS account. Yeah, it still wants to put me in.
I think it's amazing that you're doing this live. I mean, every live demo I've ever seen just, sort of implodes.
Well, we're not good yet. So don't jinx me.
Not good at it.
I love when the company guys come and they try and do a live demonstration. It's like hilarious.
So we had that when we were looking at data portals. And it was gonna be like $35,000 and the guy couldn't even like get it to
You
me.
can't get it to run, yeah.
I'm like, okay.
That's what happens at national meetings when you have to give a talk.
Okay, so now I'm in my personal AWS account. And so now I'm going to click this Launch Stack button.
Oh, you made a link in your PowerPoint.
Yeah.
That also never works. for me.
Never.
Never.
I always forget to like share my whole desktop and I'm only sharing my PowerPoint and then I click the link.
Yeah.
And I've got the link, but no one else has the link.
Yeah. Okay, so so by clicking that link, it brought me to the CloudFormation console and into like creating a stack. The way that it's set up, all of the NeuroStack specifications are already set up for you. So I'm just gonna click next, and I'm just gonna keep clicking next. I don't need to do any modifications. On the last page before creating the stack, I do need to check this box to say that I acknowledge that AWS CloudFormation will create IAM resources. Then I'm going to create the stack. So now NeuroStack is creating, and this will take a few minutes.
So it already created an EC2, it's on, based on everything that you did.
It will create an EC2 in a little bit. I'm going to show you where it's going to create an
Okay.
EC2. So now let's talk about how EC2 or how NeuroStack works and like the infrastructure behind it while it's getting set up. So right now, while NeuroStack is installing in my AWS environment, what it's doing is it's creating all of this infrastructure. It's creating a bunch of S3 buckets, it's creating batch specifications, it's creating a Lambda trigger, that all, and IAM permissions that all work together. How NeuroStack will work is the user is going to take a script. Again, similar to how you would use a script when you're working with the HPC. This script can be modified for users depending on what they want to do. And they're going to upload the script into the script S3 bucket. Then they're going to take their raw data and they're going to upload it into the input S3 bucket. By putting the data in the input S3 bucket, that triggers a Lambda function. The Lambda function says, if data is uploaded into this input bucket, start processing it in batch. Batch is pre-configured, where batch will need an AMI, and I specified the Nitrix CE AMI, so that when you use NeuroStack, you have access to all of the pre-installed software that's available on the Nitrix CE. And then it also needs a container to run in. We haven't really talked about containers. It's for people who've used like Docker or Singularity, it's the same kind of concept, but it's also kind of like a compute environment. I've created a customized container for NeuroStack that includes the AWS command line interface, which is just the AWS command line interface or AWS CLI. It just allows you to navigate AWS consoles programmatically, as opposed to like the GUI version that we've been using where we point and click. And then it also includes a fetch and run script that will start, that will do the fetch and run script as soon as the container is started. The fetch and run script is going to go and grab the template script from the script S3 bucket, and it's going to start running it. When it starts running it, AWS batch is going to start up in EC2. So instead of the manual way that we do it, it is pre-configured to say how to set up the EC2 on our behalf. There is two choices for EC2s that you can use in NeuroStack. The first is an on-demand EC2 instance, which is what we just did. With the on-demand EC2 instance, that's like the full price version of EC2. And it is, functionally like how it sounds, where you can, you request the EC2 and it'll start up right away and you can use it for however long you want. You could also use a spot EC2. A spot EC2, for those of you who are familiar with using HPC, it's similar to Scavenge, where you are going to use the excess computational power that AWS has available that nobody has requested for on-demand instances. And it's heavily discounted from the full price on-demand version. It can, somewhere between like 40 to 90% savings. So I have programmed NeuroStack to use the spot EC2 instances by default, because I think most research labs will be interested in the cost savings of the spot EC2. One negative thing that happens from using the spot EC2, though, is that if enough people request on-demand instances in that instance type, then you get booted off and your process stops. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen from time to time. But usually, like even from having instances stop, it's just such a big savings as opposed to the on-demand price. But it's very easy in NeuroStack to switch your settings and say that you'd like to use the on-demand instance instead. And then once it has processed through the EC2, then it will output the data to the output S3 bucket. And part of what batch does in its provisioning is it starts up the EC2 on your behalf, and when it's done running the script, it terminates the EC2 as well. So you don't have to worry about starting it up and stopping it and everything. It will just run it, which is obviously a lot quicker doing it from a script than if you're like typing it out, and like there's a lot of lost time if you're working with the data interactively on an EC2. But yeah, so the finished data will go into an output S3 bucket. Let's see here. Perfect. Okay, so now you can see that NeuroStack, the create is complete. And if I look at events and I scroll through, you can see a log of it creating all of these different resources in my AWS environment. I forgot to show this before, but if you had looked at my AWS account before I had created NeuroStack, imagine that you had, then you would have seen this free surfer output. That's something I'll get to later just to show you what the free surfer output would look like. But that would have been the only S3 bucket in my environment. And now NeuroStack has created the input, output, and script buckets. And if you had looked in my batch console, then you wouldn't have seen any kind of specifications. I wouldn't have had any job definitions or job queues or any of that set up. But now with NeuroStack, I do have some specifications for batch jobs. All right, so then how we will get this to work is, if you remember from the graphic that I just showed, the first step is I'm going to take some data and I'm going to put it, I'm going to take my script and I'll put it in the script bucket. And we're going to look at the script in just a second. Oh, am I not? Thought it was connected to the show, right? I have all of this on the share drive under this folder, NeuroStack demo. So I'm going to take this NeuroStack script and I'm going to put it in my script bucket.
Oh, you just moved it from the shared drive right onto AWS.
Right onto AWS, yeah.
Cool.
If you have lots of data to move, there are, with the AWS CLI, there's more efficient ways to do it, but if you're just working with a couple files and they're not too big, then I'm going to go into the NeuroStack input bucket, and I'm going to take I'm going to take this test.nii. This is just a structural imaging file, and I'm going to, that is the data that I want to work with.
Is it just one subject?
It's just one for the demo,
Okay.
but it could be, I could upload 5, 20, 100, and it'll work the same way. They could be all uploaded at the same time, and they will all have their own process started. Okay, so if you look here at the instructions, it says, add test to the input bucket. An optional, so one thing that you can do is just wait, and after several minutes, your data will be uploaded automatically to the output bucket. But optionally, you can also watch your job process run through batch, which is what we're going to do. So as soon as I uploaded the data into the input bucket, if you'll remember, that triggered a Lambda function, which started a job in batch. So now if I go into the batch console, you can see I have a job and it's in runnable. So it's waiting for the resources to become available. It'll be a few minutes. this kind of shows like the different path that your batch processes go through with like submitted, pending as if it's waiting on something. Right now it's in runnable, waiting for the resources. It'll start up, it'll run, and then it will hopefully go into succeeded. But we shall see. Okay, so while we are waiting for that to run, let's take a look at what the script is doing. So this part up here, this is all kind of specifications that I put into the script that I don't plan on users modifying, because it's helpful. It allows it to run in a smoothly. But here's the user modified part, which is what users where they should put in the commands that they would like to run. So I change directories into this tilde is for like a home directory. And then I'm going to, this command copies data from the NeuroStack input bucket. It'll grab the subject.nii. This here is like a variable that specifies the name of the subject. So you saw that I put in test.nii. Part of what like this is doing up here is it's saying that the name, the subject name should be the name before like the first dot. So it'll be like test.nii. I could also put in like Hailey.nii and it will call it, and now the ASUB will be Hailey and it will look for Hailey.nii. So then this is an AFNI command. This is the AFNI command that is going to change the file type from the .nii, and it's going to change it into an AFNI file type. AFNI file types, when it outputs a file, it actually outputs two files. One is titled .grip. I don't know why, but that's the actual data. And one is titled .head, which is the header file. So then I'm going to copy those files into my NeuroStack output. So it might still be running, and this might take a few minutes. Oh, there we go, it's running. And while we wait for it to finish up, we can also talk about the different types of software that's available in the Nitric CE. So these are all the software that's available currently. The top ones like FSL, SPM, AFNI, those are like the big three for functional imaging analysis. FreeSurfer, as I mentioned, is like the standard one to use for structural imaging analysis.
You mean like volume and surface area?
Like volume and surface area,
I see.
yeah. Planck, I have not worked with, but I've heard a lot about working in the genetics lab. 3D Slicer is another big one. And then there's also all sorts of other software as well.
So these are all within Nitric, and then you made Nitric now accessible within AWS.
Yeah, so Nitric was accessible within AWS too, like you could use it for like PC2s and things, but because I've included it in NeuroStack, when you're using NeuroStack, you also have access to all of this software installed.
But if I wanted to know, for example, Planck, you're right, we use Planck for all our GWASs,
Yeah.
for our genome-wide association studies. So if we wanted to know more about that, we could go to the Nitric website, and probably on there's a link to how to use, or what, why would you use Planck, and how Planck would be applicable to the data set within Nitric, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think so. The Nitric website mostly just lists what's available, but basically because it's on nitrate, like in the EC2 example that I showed, from that EC2, you could run Planck commands. And it's already installed for you. And then you can run Planck commands as well in NeuroStack.
Cool.
Okay, yay, it succeeded. We went from 4 to 5. Okay, so another thing that's really nice is, so when I click on the jobs that succeeded, I can see this one from just right now. You can see it ran for 10 seconds. So even though it took a few minutes, waiting for the resources to be available and things like that, the actual compute time that we were charged for was just 10 seconds because that's how long it took for the script to run.
That's only $100,000, right?
Yeah,
No.
something like that. So when I click on the job,
No,
one
it's
thing
only like
that's-
$1,
yeah.
right? Okay.
one thing that's really nice for troubleshooting is I can look at this log string. I can click on that and it is going to show me how everything ran on NeuroStack. So it'll show me all of the output from doing all these commands. So if your job fails, then you can look at this and see, the error message about why it failed.
Okay, that's your log file.
Yeah, that's the
Okay.
log file. So now, because it succeeded, we can go to the S3 and I can look at my output folder. And there we go. There's my brick file and my head file that it's converted from happening. Okay. All right, so now we're going to do work with NeuroStack with FreeSurfer, and this is more like a realistic job that we would use NeuroStack to do. We're going to take this anatomical, it's called a nifty file, and it's like the .nii. We're going to take this anatomical file, and we're going to process it in FreeSurfer, and we're just it's going to work the same way. There's one addition because FreeSurfer requires a license file in order to run. It's free to use, but they just make you register for it. I use it for like grant purposes or something to see how many people are using it. So we're just gonna add this license file into our script S3 bucket, and we're gonna make sure to copy that in as well in our script. So when I look at my S3 buckets, I can go into my input. And actually, it's the same file. And so even though it's already there, I do need to upload it again, because if you'll remember, the Lambda trigger happens when, I actually need to, before doing that. That'll just process it and Acme again. Okay, I need to go to my script bucket. And now I have this FreeSurfer version of the NeuroStack script. So I'm going to upload that. And it's just going to overwrite. It's called the same thing. It looks for something called NeuroStack_script.sh. So it has to be called the same. And then I also want to add this license file so that FreeSurfer will run. And then I'm going to go into input and I'm going to add test.nii. And by uploading, that's going to trigger my Lambda function to run it in batch according to the instructions that I have in my script. And now if we look at batch, we can see that the job isn't runnable. And this will take several Yeah, actually, it'll take several hours to run. So we won't be together when it finishes. But when it does finish, the output is gonna look, I'll show you what it looks like.
This is gonna be more than 10 seconds of computing.
Yeah, it's gonna be a few hours. It's gonna be like 5 or 6 hours,
Okay.
depending on the EC2 instance it chooses, but. So you'll have a folder with the subject name. And inside that folder, there's gonna be some other folders that have different parts of the preserver output. So then what I'm looking to clean up. So the cleanup is really important because, you know, with AWS, you pay for like the storage that you're using. And so right now I have files that are being held by AWS in storage. So I'm gonna keep being charged for these things until I take them off of AWS. There's also like really tiny charges, like you don't really have to think about them too much because it's like infinitesimally small, but there's tiny charges just from having these different like infrastructure setups throughout your account. So you don't just want to like be making like all this like infrastructure if you're never going to use it or anything. So once you're all done with using NeuroStack, then the cleanup is really easy. You don't have to do this each time. Like if I were using NeuroStack on a regular basis, then it's not a big deal for me to just keep these things in my account and everything. But if you're looking to not be charged, maybe you're not ready to use like NeuroStack on a regular basis or something at this point, then what you would do is you would go into your S3 buckets and you would delete all of the things that are inside the buckets. And so pretend I've deleted what's inside the buckets. And then I would go to my Cloud Formation console. And I would delete the NeuroStack stack and out of Cloud Formation. And then that'll be the reverse process where it's just going to delete all of the infrastructure that was associated with NeuroStack. So all of that will be gone from the account. So then, thank you so much for listening to my talk today and like for all the support that I've received here to be able to work on NeuroStack. Does anybody have any questions?
That was great.
Thank you.
I have a random question that's not super important.
Yeah.
So when someone uses NeuroStack, do you get anything from it because you spent all this time making it?
Just joy.
Joy is good too.
But yeah, I plan on it being free to use. I mean, of course, like AWS charges for the services that you use when you're using NeuroStack, but NeuroStack itself won't have any charges associated with it.
That's cool.
And I'm hoping, like knock on wood, but I'm hoping to launch the beta version, within a month. So
That's so awesome, Hailey. That's
you.
like
Yeah.
mind-blowingly cool.
Thank you so much.
I have 2 questions, and I apologize in advance for how rudimentary they're going to be. This was fascinating, and you made it so accessible. Thank you so much. I'm sure a ton of work and preparation went into this. One, so what we just went through is one participant, right? And it's going to take about 5 hours, you said. What happens when, like, if you're running multiple participants simultaneously, because you also said you could do that, do you have to wait for all of them to finish, or does it like do it as like one queue at a time?
So you can put them up simultaneously, and they'll run. One thing about using spot instances is because you're using excess, then you don't want to use up like your own like excess computational like
Right.
availability. So like for instance, if I had 1,000 subjects that I was going to process, I wouldn't upload the whole 1,000 at a time unless I was going to do on demand. If I switched it to on demand and I was willing to pay full price, then I can just upload the 1,000 and they will all run at the same time. And in 5 hours, I will have completed the process for 1,000 subjects. But that would be very expensive. So I would use the spot version, and then I would just upload them a certain amount at a time.
Got it. Okay, and then this question, I don't even know if I know how to ask it. So if I wanted, because we're such a collaborative team, so say I wanted to take some of this neuroimaging data that we're running through this and merge it to look at associations with behavioral data, which is typically what I do. So I'm like in the world of like M+ coding and creating latent variables based on behavior and reading, right? And motivation, of course. Is there a way to export, once you generate all of these files in NeuroStack, to export them and use them? Like, how are programs compatible is basically what I'm trying to understand for doing cross analyses.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways that you can do that, like to integrate it with behavioral data. The way that I'm using for the ABCD is like, so after the whole process is done, the final output is just a CSV file that shows for each child, like the volume in all these different lobules of the cerebellum. And so I just export that CSV file, and it's really small. It's actually really funny because, like there's like all this computational power that went into it, and then like all these huge files that you deal with, and at the end you just get like a tiny little CSV. But anyway, so you can just export that from your SQL.
Okay.
It's just one of the options. You just select it and you say download.
Okay, so I can basically think of all of this as just like one giant processing step that will create like a compatible form of data.
Yeah, and then you can integrate it with your behavioral data. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is like with AFNI, for like some of the functional data that we work with, sometimes you're doing the analyses with the actual voxels, and you're looking at like the activation patterns. And so with that, you would want the data to be your behavioral data. You're basically bringing the behavioral data to your neuroimaging data, where you have like a file that has all of your behavioral data. And then within AFNI, you say to look for the behavioral data in this particular file, and you want to use this variable, these few variables as predictors in your model. So that's another way to do it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
So Kim, the ABCD has pre-processed and processed all the imaging data on the entire brain, including the cerebellum. And that's available to you as a flat file, as you call this CSV, or an Excel spreadsheet. And Kelson's been working with that. And you can also download the equivalent thing for all the behavioral stuff. And so, but you wouldn't be surprised if I told you is that that's pretty well picked over. By the time it's uploaded, back onto ABCD, they upload the pre-processed data, and people have done those associations and look for those sorts of things. And so they'll be somewhat useful to you, but not all that super useful to you. In other words, it's pretty vanilla stuff. There's surface area, there's volume. I think there's 264 regions of interest, with primary focus basically on cerebral cortex. Now, when it gets interesting, for example, is that Hailey was interested in the cerebellum, and the vanilla type of approach that they used to determine surface area volume for the cortex is not a great approach for the cerebellum. Think about the cortex like a basketball, and the cerebellum hanging off it as like sort of an orange. And so when you do the math, you do the Fourier transformation, you want to focus on the big data, so that's the brain, the cortex, sorry, and so it doesn't do such a great resolution for the cerebellum. We wanted it under high resolution. And so that's how we got started in all of this. And so that's not available as pre-processed data from ABCD. That is, best as I can tell, Hailey's the only person who's actually doing that. And so now that opens the door for her and for Kelson to begin to look at those associations between behavior, genetics, and volume and surface area of the individual lobules of the cerebellum. So that, I mean, it's sort of, you have to go beyond the superficial. I mean, that's why we're all here anyways. And if it was easy, it's been done. We're not here to do easy. We're here to get answers. And so there, you can start by using the pre-processed data for sure. But then, as you already suggested, you're going to want to do all kinds of interesting things with the behavioral data, or if there's motivation data, or latent factors, or some sort of, those sorts of things. And, or you may want to look at different parts of the cortex or the cerebellum with greater resolution or in different ways. And so now that would require, going to the next step. So you can start with the pre-processed stuff, get your feet wet, ask the kind of easy question, start with your questions. But then when you really want to take a deep dive, we can do that. So basically, what Hailey didn't mention is that when she said she uploaded the input data, the imaging data, that's raw data, correct me if I'm wrong, that actually comes out of the imaging machine. So when you stick your kids in the, I don't know what you guys use, what you're familiar with, what's the most common imaging machine that we use?
So for the NHLP, we did a Prisma fit.
Which that's the German one, what's it called?
Siemens, I think.
Yeah, it's just the Siemens imaging machine, or a GE, right? It gives you, what you see on the screen when you're sitting there, you see this processed, beautiful, high resolution picture of a brain, but what it really is zeros and ones. And so what she started with is 0 and 1s. And what Resurfer and Apnea can do is convert those to the beautiful imaging pictures that you see. And so when when you initial analysis, Kate wants to look at math and its equivalent, you can start with what's been pre-processed. But if you want to do something more, which I hope you do, then we may have to rerun the imaging or parts of the imaging, or on selected individuals in the imaging, that kind of thing. And so then we can do that. We have the capability to do that.
Great, perfect. Thanks.
Hailey, that was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
I'm really
much.
excited to share that with you guys, because I feel like for a long time I've been able to, I talk about NeuroStack, but then actually showing you how it works and what it is and everything. It's different.
Any questions?
I have some small question, maybe we can.
Sure, yeah, sounds good.
All right. Thank you, everybody. It's great seeing you.
That was awesome, Hailey. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hailey, so
Bye.
much.
Mhm.
Bye.
Thank you.